Good morning, Rachel, and thank you for the introduction. You know, Rachel said something really important when she introduced us and she started set the stage for the day. She used the word tactical. You know, we're talking all about a lot of the new technologies and we're talking about digital strategies and what organizations are doing. And you know, that word tactical is something that often is not part of the dialogue. I want you to know that we did spend a lot of time crafting the agenda for this event. And this opening keynote covers three important topics. The first topic is, where are we in terms of our digital journeys? A very pragmatic, feet on the ground approach. What I'm going to share with you is worldwide survey data from 23 countries that shows the state of digital strategy implementation in organizations like yours. As, or perhaps more important, I'm going to contrast that with local data from New Zealand. So you can see worldwide data, and you'll be able to contrast it with what's going on here in your beautiful country. By the way, my first visit to New Zealand, and I'm certainly enjoying it. The second part of the presentation, we went in, and as we did these surveys and asked people where they were on their digital strategy journey, we asked them what were the problems and challenges they were having. I'm going to be sharing those with you as well. As part of that, I'm also going to share some of the best practices that organizations are implementing to overcome those challenges. The third and final part of the presentation, I'm going to share with you some best practices that we have seen for IT and technology leaders in terms of achieving their outcomes with digital strategies. So with that, let's get started. Okay, folks, a little kick on there we go. When we were talking about digital strategies a couple of years ago, we were talking about some crazy stuff. We were in a period of experimentation. We were talking about, 3D printing cars that have been crowdsourced designed. We were talking about, using our mobile phones to open up hotel room doors as part of a loyalty program. We were talking about robotic bartenders on a cruise ship to wow people. And all this was interesting, but it was proof of concept. It wasn't real. We're now in a very different place. So folks, maybe a different remote. Yeah, there we go. Back up one for me. Yeah. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing implementations of digital strategies at scale. Now, I want to start with the third picture, which is the Air New Zealand plane. And this is not an attempt to play to the crowd. Many of you probably know that Air New Zealand was the launch customer for Boeing's 787-9 aircraft. And while that plane is having some problems with its Trent Rolls-Royce engines, that's a detail that we're not going to go into today. We're going to talk about what Boeing did that was very different and unique about that aircraft. So by the way, this is the first commercial aircraft ever where the structural frame of the airplane is made out of titanium. That has been the case for some military aircraft, but not for commercial aircraft. And the reason is that titanium is notoriously difficult to fabricate. By the way, the dust from titanium as you grind it happens to be explosive, is one example of how miserable it is. By the way, if you are running an industrial organization and you're trying to scale up the launch of a new aircraft, how do you build enough of these things that you can fulfill the customer demand? Boeing and Norsk Titanium have created new industrial methods where 17.5% of the airframe, the structural frame of that airplane, is made out of 3D printed titanium. Largest implementation ever. It speaks to a way to overcome a blockage in terms of skills and talent. It also speaks to a way to simplify the industrial process. Let's talk about the middle picture. Let's talk about Steinway piano. Probably everybody's heard of Steinway piano, right? Arguably one of the finest brands of piano in the world. Maybe you didn't know, but the sales of Steinway pianos haven't been going very well lately. And when I say not going well, that might be the understatement you'll hear for the last 2 days. For whatever reason, the world's desire to acquire pianos has declined at double-digit rates for at least the last 3 years. In May, Steinway announced a new program. They call it Spirio. And what Spirio does, anybody ever watch that old TV show, Star Trek: The Next Generation? Remember they had that android who would play the violin, Data? And you'd ask Data, well, Data, do you play the violin? He'd say, no, I just merely recreate the performance of a master. What the stereo piano does is it measures digitally the impact speed and strength of each hammer hitting each wire inside the piano. So it's not recording the audio performance of the piano, of the song that the artist is playing, it's recording the actual production of the sound. By the way, they sell those transcripts. So you can buy a transcript of David Benoit, a jazz pianist, and you can have it recreated in your home. Not replayed in your home, but recreated. So it's a perfect example of when we talk about digital transformation, we're talking about technology in service of new disruptive business models. This is very much a new business model. You have Steinway not manufacturing very expensive and exquisite tools, but they're manufacturing and they're selling and monetizing data, the data of their musical performances. The final example is from Walmart. So Walmart is well into an aggressive rollout of putting robots in 50+ stores in North America. By this time, it's actually past that. It's probably going to be probably in the hundreds by the end of this calendar year. What's striking about these robots is that these robots can take a complete inventory in a large Walmart store in 2 evenings. Now you'd say, so what? What does that get me? We only need to inventory once a year. Well, imagine for a moment if you ran a chain of stores and you could cost effectively inventory the entire store once a week instead of once a year. What kind of management model would you put in place? And the answer is, I don't know, but it would be a different management model, and it might be a management model that's more efficient and effective and allows me to run that store better. That's what Walmart is playing with. They're talking about using these technologies to change the method of store operation. Many times you've heard the conversation that the rate of technology changes is accelerating. This is a graph, and what the graph shows is something that I personally find quite striking. So coincidentally, 60 years ago, if a company made it to a list called the S&P 500, the S&P 500 are the 500 largest publicly traded companies in North America. If you made that list, you coincidentally stayed on that list about 60 years. If you got on that list today, you probably would last 18 years on the list, and that's assuming there's no further declines. If I just track the rate of decline, it would suggest that it's actually shortening further. So think about it. You ever go to the butcher shop and you see the wall hanging in the butcher shop and it shows how to, the different cuts of meat as you carve up the cow, or you carve up the sheep, or you carve up the pig? Well, there's pictures like that of Fox Media hanging in boardrooms all across America as companies vie for the right to pay $60 billion in cash and carve up Fox Media, a $60 billion company. So this isn't just something that our small companies are involved with. So when somebody says to you, is the rate of change, is our world becoming more aggressive? Is it really changing? The answer is, here is one data point that analytically demonstrates that in fact, yes, it is. So let's talk about where we are in terms of companies progressing with their digital strategies. What you see on the charts are 5 columns. From left to right, these are the percentage of companies that we surveyed on a worldwide basis in terms of where they were in the maturity of their digital strategies. So the least mature are on the far left, the most mature are on the far right. I direct you to the far right. You see that between 20 and 5% of the companies are in that stage 4 and stage 5. So let's call it 25%. 1 in 4 of those companies are in those advanced, have implemented or in the process of implementing relatively advanced digital strategies. By our definition at IDC, when we talk about an advanced digital strategy, we're talking about an organization that in fact has one digital strategy, not digital strategies for each of the individual business units, but all the arrows, all the wood behind the single arrowhead. If you look to the left, about 16% of the companies are digital resistors. In other words, they're thinking about maybe someday soon we need to get going on this whole digital thing. So 15% of them are not even participating at all. Remember on that last slide, I said that companies have a 18-year lifespan once they reach their peak size. Well, these would be the companies that would probably be the takeover candidates. In the middle, the most important is you see the companies, the 30 and the 29%, These are the companies that are in this middle phase right now, that are struggling with a multi-tier digital strategy or a multi-business unit digital strategy. Now, what's striking is that in green is the data for New Zealand. If you look again to the far left, so New Zealand, 30% of your companies are well advanced in terms of digital strategy implementation, ahead of the worldwide average. Does that make sense? I think it does. New Zealand is a country with a history of entrepreneurial behavior, and basically the way you are going to create wealth is not by giving each other haircuts. You need to be dealing with the outside, international operations. You need to create wealth by trading and through entrepreneurship and through risk-taking. Respectfully, Rachel, they're doing okay. I think there's opportunity to improve, but it's an impressive performance. To the far left, only 6% of the companies are digital resistors. Now, I'll be very candid with you. This New Zealand survey is not statistically normalized. It's by you in this crowd. And what that means is that this sample size is more skewed to the larger organizations in New Zealand. It hasn't been normalized based on the actual number of companies, and it hasn't been normalized across all the different industry segments. But it's a representation, an accurate representation. 95 of you participated in this survey, that it gives you a sense of where you are as a country. It also gives you a sense, I think, to calibrate where you are as an organization as you think about your journey. Now, we're going to go through this next part of the presentation, and what I intend to do is I intend to look at the five biggest obstacles that companies have encountered as they look at their digital strategies. And looking at this clock face and going around the clock face, at 2 o'clock, about 18% of the organizations, and by the way, this is New Zealand data, 18% of you are saying you're experiencing difficulties implementing your digital strategy because of internal organizational conflicts or inhibitions. 25% of you are saying we're having trouble because of our IT systems, the so-called digital platform. 15% are talking about the need for tactical roadmaps, and I'll talk about what that means in a little more detail in a moment. 21% are struggling with metrics. I worked for many years at US General Electric. I had the privilege of working with Jack Welch. A sidebar, I will tell you that I've never met a person who has a better press relations group, because he seems like a nice guy to the external world. Having sat across the table from him, it was not always quite that enjoyable. We believed at GE, the culture was that you got what you measured. And that is part of my DNA. That's what I believe. That's why I think it's relevant to talk about the KPIs that you implement in your own organizations. And then finally, the implementation of capabilities. So let's take the 5 of these and let's drill through them and let's do a quick march. So what you see here are 4 different organization charts from left to right. Let's first talk about the first 3 going from left to right. The Special Projects Team, the Office of Digital Transformation, and the Embedded Digital Business. From left to right, these represent, in our opinion at IDC, the least mature IT DX, or not IT, but DX organization models, to the most mature and most sophisticated by the embedded digital model. What you see in the first one is essentially the first phase, and that first phase is organizations where you essentially have a small team that reports directly to the CIO, and they're basically doing proof of concept work around digital. Is this real? Is this something our company should be looking at? Let's stick our toe in the pond and dabble. The middle one, the parallel is probably many of you have PMO organizations where you sort of have one organization that does oversight, coordination. We're seeing the equivalent of that with an Office of Digital Transformation, functioning as an oversight to try to coordinate some of the digital strategies in a more formal way. And then finally, the ultimate model is what we think is the third one, which is the embedded digital business. The embedded digital business is about, think about this way. 30, 40, 50 years ago, we would have a director of engineering, and all the engineers in the company reported up to the director of engineering. Now that's not the case. Most business units have their engineers as part of the business unit, as part of the fabric. Ultimately, we think that that's the end state of what organizations are going to look like, is having those DX specialists actually embedded in the business unit, part of the fabric of the business unit. From left to right, this is the percentage of companies. So 30% are in this early experimentation phase. 46%, almost half, are in that middle phase, the PMO-like oversight. And then the third phase is the embedded digital business. So you're probably thinking, what's this digital business unit thing, this fourth thing at the far left? That's kind of a special case. And the special case is that you have organizations who struggle with implementing digital transformation for a whole variety of reasons. And what they do is they set up a digital twin. They will rent office space across town. They will literally stand up a new business, a new organization, and experiment with new ideas. The case study on that is a Spanish bank called Santander. Santander set up a digital bank across town. Within 2 years, the digital bank was responsible for 150% of the total bank's growth. 150%. So guess what? The main bank was shrinking. So the CEO of the main bank retires. The CEO of the digital twin gets made the CEO of the new combined entities. They smush them together, and that's how they overcame some of the obstacles to move along on their digital journey. What's interesting is the next bar that I've just brought up is this is how you shape up here in NZ. 12% of you are in that early phase, which is quite small relative to the worldwide. 17% of you are using this PMO structure. Fully half of you are using this advanced, you're at this advanced state of organizational implementation. Bravo. Bravo, because the people part is, frankly, our view, the hardest part of this. It's not the technology, it's the people. You know that, you've lived it. Finally, still almost 1 in 5 of your organizations are playing with this digital twin model. We think it's an interim state, and I'd love to chat with anybody who, over coffee at the end of my session. Let's talk real quickly about a case study. I'm going to talk about Carl Governor. Carl Governor is an IT leader at a large financial services company based in Chicago, Illinois. There's a couple of things that are really interesting that Carl has done. You know, as we talk about digital strategies, we talk about the need for IT transformation. I think this is probably one of the most interesting examples of IT transformation I've come across. Carl basically took and collapsed 20 plus job descriptions into 7 job descriptions. So he simplified his organizational architecture. He basically organized around customer focus as opposed to technology platforms, all in on agile, lean development, and so forth. The interesting thing is he took the management, a lot of the what I personally call the IT pots and pans, and he took the IT pots and pans stuff and he moved that, he outsourced it. You know, running Outlook mail servers or the Outlook mail system is, while it's important, it's not necessarily something that creates differentiating business value for the organization, so Carl outsourced that. He's focusing on where his team can create the value, the business competence related to creating business differentiation. So with that, let's go to the section which was the digital platform, which is what you have identified here in New Zealand as the #1 issue. The model that we see in a lot of organizations is islands of digital innovation. Everybody kind of off doing their own thing. And by the way, this is how we run most of our organizations. So there's no criticism here, no shame. The problem and the challenge is, let's take a typical bank as an example. In a typical bank, you have multiple, organizations. You might have a treasury, you might have retail banking, you might have online banking. And, the reality is they don't do such a great job sharing the data set. The problem is they accumulate the data. Each has a picture of a part of the customer. If they can't integrate that to create a unified picture of what the customer is doing, then they can't really craft a true digital strategy. That's why we say that we believe the best-in-class organizations have an integrated digital strategy across all of their business units. Now, what does that mean in terms of technology platforms? Right now, this is where a lot of the action is in digital transformation. Companies are looking at new digital platforms. The vendor community, including many of the folks that are outside these doors, are working furiously to build new digital platforms. We expect to see a load of these new platforms come out over the next few years. In fact, we think that probably as much as 60% of the major organizations are going to make investments in major DX platforms over the next few years. This is a very striking graphic. This might be the single most important graphic in the entire presentation. What we're doing with this graphic is we're here to provide you with a conceptual framework of what a new digital platform might look like. And by the way, you're thinking, wow, I've never seen any IT architectural drawing that looked like that, and frankly, that's the point. Right now, the single most valuable thing in your enterprise is your data. not your infrastructure. Your infrastructure has been commoditized. It's all about your data. The problem right now is in virtually all of our organizations, the data is stored in a way that makes it efficient for the platform to use it, not for you to monetize it, analyze it, and create new insights. In the future, your digital core, your intelligent core, the information in your business needs to be at the center of what you do. And by the way, think about it this way. The old model used to be the castle keep, right? We would have the hill, we would dig a moat, we would build castle walls. We'd put people up on the walls with hot tar in case anybody tried to get in. In the new model, it's not like that. You know, we have a loop of data that goes out throughout the organization. It needs to be connected to APIs, which draw in sensor data from factory floors, from shipping, from production. By the way, that data then needs to be analyzed. Insights need to be identified, and then those insights codified and put back in the intelligent core so that they can be acted on. Think about a model like Facebook or Google. This is how they think about data. They don't think about the data as, keeping it locked up in the castle. And by the way, there's an equal loop that goes outside, connects to the business partners, connects to customers, connects to external sensors, might include data that was purchased and then brought in and used to augment the existing customer data sets for better insights and to create additional business differentiation. A very different way of thinking about this. You're probably thinking, well, that's all great, but we need security. Well, of course. Of course, you've heard about the mess that Facebook had with their data. I would say it's actually a pretty simple thing that Facebook did wrong. Facebook didn't have a model that was able to distinguish whom they could trust digitally and whom they could not trust digitally. And based on the continuing drip of bad news that comes out, it seems that they still haven't gotten that quite figured out. Personally, professionally at IDC, what we think in terms of where the future of security is it's around a model called digital trust, which is being able to identify whom you can trust and whom you can't, because you have to exchange data between the parties in a consistent way. So let's move along. Oops. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about digital roadmaps and what digital roadmaps are. And I'm having a little trouble. Yeah, sorry about that. There we go. So this is, again, your data. So right now, 1 in 5 of you has an integrated set of roadmaps across your various business units. Almost half of you have coordinated digital roadmaps between different units and businesses. 1 in 3 of you has very, and I'm being euphemistic, loosely connected roadmaps. So in other words, what you're doing in terms of your digital strategies has varying degrees of integration across your organizations. Now, when we talk about a digital roadmap, this is the concept and this is the challenge that we see at IDC. It's not clear today what the end state is going to be for a lot of the digital strategies. I'll use an obvious example in a parallel industry, which is electric cars. It's not clear what an electric car is really going to look like. What battery technology is going to become the predominant battery technology? What's the recharging standards? How are they going to be licensed? And so forth. The industry is still in flux. In a lot of other industries, we still can't see the end state of what these new digital strategies are. So let me give you an example, and let's flip, if we could, for just a moment, go on a quick journey with me to the land of retail organizations. If you live in retail right now, one of the battles that you are fighting, you go to bed at night worried about, you wake up in the morning thinking about a concept called intelligent fulfillment. That is the battle the industry is fighting. And by the way, what they have been doing for the last 7 years is they've been fighting with a concept called omni-channel, which is the ability to support you as customers in a consistent way, both in brick and mortar, through PCs, through mobile devices, and so forth. The idea is I could order something on a mobile device, I could return it to the physical store, and so forth. The industry's pretty much got that figured out, not completely, but almost. Right now, the thing they're struggling with is a concept called real-time inventory. And what real-time inventory is, if you take a large distributed retail store, a lot of them are actually shipping online orders, not from warehouses or fulfillment centers, but they're actually shipping them right from retail stores. Now, the problem with that because while it's reasonable business strategy, it's very hard to manage inventory because, you've got the demand model that you were doing on a store basis, and now you're sort of overlaying a demand model of ordering that's coming in via the web. And how do you predict what product you need in what store at what time? So it's very hard to do and create an integrated inventory management model. That battle is being fought in real time. That's what they're worried about. That's the battle they'll solve in the next few years. The problem is that just around the corner is the concept of just-in-time production. We're going to be 3D printing, Nike sneakers in stores in 3 years, maybe 4, maybe 2. It's coming, and it's in the window of measuring. Now, how do you do inventory management when you've got just-in-time production? That creates another entire level of complication. The point of this whole exercise is that when you walk in to the board of directors and you say, we need to make an investment to solve this problem with our digital strategies, the reality is that you probably have 2 more iterations of technology beyond that. And the point is about thinking about a technology plan that's a 2 or 3 jump technology plan. It's not a one and done process at this point because the industry standards haven't been established and are not clear. In fact, about 1 in 3 of you have these partitioned, multi-dimensional roadmaps. Basically, 2/3 of you are not quite there yet. IDC has created a model to manage this whole process across the various industries because the digital technologies that you're going to implement, while the underlying technologies might be somewhat similar, there's significant differences by industry. So for example, the way you deploy a mobility solution in a hospital or a healthcare chain is very different than the mobility solution you would in a logistics management organization. So we are in the process of building out 550 use cases across a whole segment, a whole raft of industry segments that basically provide templates for executives and leaders like you to build your digital strategies. If you're interested in that, contact one of us at IDC. And of course, those of you that are IDC clients have full access and are quite familiar with this. One of the questions I get a lot is, Joe, where do I start? Or, we're still struggling. How do I engage some executives that are, the knuckle draggers, who don't quite, willing to embrace some of these digital strategies? And by the way, frankly, some of the toughest battles can be fought with entrepreneurial founders of an organization who have created the company themselves and, well, we've always done it this way and it's been successful. Why do we need to change, right? You've probably heard that once or twice in your life. I want to let you know that the thing that if you're not familiar with, you need to get onto the whole customer journey map concept. I'll give you a quick example of customer journey mapping. I don't know if anybody's heard of a financial services company in the United States called Vanguard. They're the largest mutual fund company in the world. So what Vanguard, they brought in a new CIO, and he and I had an opportunity to talk. He had some interesting comments. He said his first comment was, when you get promoted to coming in a very senior position in a major organization, they don't hire you because everything is going well. They hire you because there's a dumpster fire in the back, and your job is to go put it out. He said the difference is there's 2 kinds of dumpster fires. There's dumpster fires because the person who was your previous CIO was incompetent. He says that doesn't happen very often. He goes, more to the point is that somebody in the leadership has decided to bring the boat around 30 degrees, and that's why you've got a dumpster fire to deal with. Their systems were well regarded. They had gone in and they had done usability testing for 100 years, right? Their online systems met every modern standard of what was considered normal. But there had been some suspicions around the edges that maybe things weren't all that great. So the CIO did some pretty cool stuff. He basically went out to customers and interacted with customers in situations where they needed to interact with Vanguard electronically, right? Because Vanguard has no physical presence, it's all electronic. So one of the places he ended up at was at funeral homes. And one of the sad realities of the business is that people need to interact with Vanguard when one of the 2 spouses dies on a jointly held account. Boy, did he get an earful. And when I say an earful, that's another polite understatement. He said that they determined that his customers reported that it took between 2.5 and 2 hours and 45 minutes and something like 78 screens to simply change from a dual-held account where somebody was deceased to a single-held account. Think about that. 78 screens, 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 45 minutes. What he did is he redesigned the whole process and the whole system interface so that it was organized around a customer who needed to do a task. When we talk about journey mapping, that's the concept of journey mapping. By the way, there's one among you in the room. I think there's folks that are here. Is there somebody here from Balance Agronutrients? Can I see a hand? No, they're not here in the room, but they're going to be here later at the event today. I'd encourage you to look for the folks at Balance Agronutrients, based here in New Zealand, because they just won a very highly respected international award for their use of customer journey mapping to create new solutions for their customers. Really, really interesting stuff at that organization, at that local company. So let's move along and let's talk about capabilities. About 100 times a day, or certainly 100 times a week, you hear the concept that to go forward in technology, we need people, process, and technology, right? People, process, and technology. Please, today, expunge that term from your mind, because it is no longer the model. It's not just about people, process, and technology. If you are going to be running your business on multiple clouds, you need a governance model, because you cannot end up with separating the heart and lungs of critical applications where you're creating solutions that require enormous amounts of cross-traffic in order to run your business. You're undermining your own resilience, you're driving up your own costs, and yeah, it was nice letting the marketing people go off and do their own thing, but if the order management people can't connect to that customer database, it's in a different cloud, you've got a real problem. So we have to talk about including governance as part of system design and systems management. And finally, most importantly, we have to include data. So it's really 5 elements. What's your data strategy? What's your governance strategy? Yeah, it's people, process, and technology, but it's also got to be governance and data strategy. And we talk about capabilities, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about building an integrated approach to technology solutions and technology management. And we as technology leaders, that monkey rests squarely on our back. It's our bad if we end up with solutions that separate the heart and the lungs, that when your successor comes in and the dumpster fire he or she faces is the fact that you have separated the heart and the lungs and allowed cloud sprawl to undermine your organization's ability to achieve its business outcomes. So what this is, these are the 4 cases of capabilities we've seen the most of. On the top is the percentage of US companies that are implementing, and on the bottom is the percentage of you in this room of what you're implementing. Number 1 category you see is data monetization. Worldwide, here in New Zealand, you have to look over to experiential engagement. And by the way, experiential engagement is this notion of creating, mixing the design of systems and technologies, perhaps as a way to augment a customer experience. Imagine if you could a phone for an application for a smartphone that allowed you to see how a particular piece of furniture might look in somebody's house. You can superimpose it. That would be an example of experiential engagement. The real key here is if you're going to look at the short list of the 4 digital capabilities that you in this room are working on, that is the map. At the beginning of this session, I talked about providing you with a framework, a very tactical grounding of where we are in the journey, where you are on the journey. This is some of that data that proves that point. So let's continue our march and let's talk a little bit about KPIs and metrics, a subject near and dear to my heart. So for starters, 3/4 of you don't have digital KPIs right out of the gate. So I would suggest this might be an opportunity for, as you reflect on your event, as you think about when you go home on Friday, what are the 3 things you're going to take out of this event, right? Respectfully, you might want to think about focusing on digital KPIs, right? As one of those 3. I'm respectfully suggesting you put that on your list. For the 22% of you that have digital KPIs, these are the KPIs that you are working with. You're working with customer advocacy, you're working with employee advocacy, data capitalization, and return on investment. This is a very different outcome from what we see worldwide, and frankly, more positive. Worldwide, the number one digital metric is DX, return on investment, or ROI. Now, the reason that I'm saying that is I want to pause and I want to give you just do a sidebar. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to do what I thought was a really fun project. I was asked to go in and lead a team to look at the long-term return on investment implications for companies that had implemented a very early digital protocol called EDI, or Electronic Data Interchange. And there's some heads nodding in the room. People looked, they kind of got ashen gray when they heard the term, but they were nodding their heads. EDI was not a great and fun technology, but it was a first pass. The part that was really interesting is we went in and we looked at the companies that implemented EDI and the ones that didn't implement EDI in industry segments. It was really striking is that there were no long-term implications or changes in return on investment for the companies that implemented EDI. And I will tell you, they spent a lot of money implementing EDI. More striking was the companies that didn't implement EDI. They were out of business. So in other words, what we concluded by looking at this study is there are periodic times in the life of an industry when you have a choice. The choice is whether or not you recapitalize and reinvest. A card player might call that table stakes, where you choose to reinvest to stay in the game. I suggest to you that we are in many ways at that same point now. There's a requirement, will be requirements over the next few years in many industries to make a decision of whether or not we are going to reinvest in our businesses and stay in the game, or offer ourselves up to be cashed out by one of those individuals who wants to stay in the game, who chooses to scale infrastructure. It's a choice. It's not a criticism, it's an observation and a suggestion of what we might be facing as we look down the path. In my view, this is the second most important slide in this deck, and I'm not going to go through this. This is a slide that's designed to be an outline that you print out and you work with, and what it is it's a framework on how to do KPIs, and what it does is it just gives you provides some stimulus and some thinking of how do you craft a KPI framework. Now, I just want to pause and I want to just say just a couple quick words on KPIs. There are KPIs that are what we call at IDC gold standard KPIs, and those typically are the financial KPIs because they're backward looking. In other words, what was the revenue that was produced in the last quarter or the last month? That's real, that's what happened. And if you're the CEO of the company, that's the single most important thing you care about. If you're the CEO, the next most important thing you care about is what's the pipeline look like for the next period, so I want to know how we're doing. We call those either operational or business KPIs. We think you need a mixture of both for your digital strategies. You need gold standard KPIs that are absolute and they can measure how you've performed, but then you need these interim KPIs, and you need to have a mixture and a set of screens that actually help you with both. So let's talk very quickly about a startup company. 22,000 startup, 22-person startup company, it's DBS Bank. Anybody ever heard of DBS Bank in Hong Kong? A few hands in the room. So DBS Bank was a very, very typical bank in 2014. And the reason they were a typical bank in 2014 is they had outsourced their entire IT organization to save money. And oh, by the way, if you looked at their customer satisfaction ratings, they were among the lowest in the industry and in the marketplace. Okay, so it was not a thing of beauty. Low standards, low cost, low customer satisfaction. Do you know in 2016, not 2017, in 2016, worldwide we invested $19 billion in fintech startups. Now, the people that invested that $19 billion in fintech startups, they didn't do that because they wanted to make a 5% return on their money. They're looking to kill it. And that $19 billion of money is looking for companies like DBS used to be. What the CIO did, he came in, the first thing he did is he insourced all his IT, brought it back into the organization, made IT a point of differentiation, focused on customer needs, focused on customer outcomes. And what he did is he focused on putting KPIs and metrics that really mattered and were relevant to the organization. Very impressive and very well focused. So it's a great case study if you want to see an organization that has really pivoted. And by the way, the common thread that I see from my perch is that a lot of companies that have decided that they really want to change the direction of the company, one of the first things they do is they start with their IT, and they bring some of the stuff that was outsourced in so they have more control and more ability to control those outcomes. So let's go to the third and final segment of our session today, and that's I'll share with you some insights in terms of what's going on in IT and what's working and what's not working. This is US, this is US data, not worldwide or AZ data. The question that we asked is IT viewed in your organization as an inhibitor or an accelerator? And you can see the way the data is skewed to the right, that a lot more people, about 5 times as many, think that IT is an accelerator rather than an inhibitor. It's a question to ponder. How would your colleagues rate you, especially if you weren't in the room? At the end of the day, this isn't about a popularity contest, but it's about getting affirmation from our internal customers that they feel that they're getting the value that they need in order to do their jobs. So what's the most important role your IT organization could do to help the digital strategy? This is what your colleagues in the line of business say. Help us with innovation, help us with technology, help us with project management. This is what they're saying about you and your colleagues in other companies. So I'm going to take a minute and I want to just do a sidebar, and I want to give you a quick case study on innovation. And I want to choose Oreo cookies. Everybody hear of Oreo cookies? Oreo cookies are the largest selling cookie in the world. They sell about $1.5 billion worth of Oreo cookies a year. Imagine it's 2007, we're getting ready to head into the recession, and you've been promoted and you're now the brand manager for Oreo cookies. Woo-hoo. You're thinking to yourself, what did I do to deserve this cross? Because I have to increase sales for a product that is not fresh, that is not healthy, that is 100 years old, and who cares about it? And my kids' college tuition is resting on my ability to increase sales of something that nobody wants or needs. Interesting challenge, and this is all real, by the way. So they started out doing what consumer product goods companies do, CPG companies do. The first thing they did is they implemented a strategy of incremental innovation, and they wanted to basically, the concept of incremental innovation in a CPG company is to create all different package sizes. So I'm going to just give you a quick list of some of the packaging changes they made. So they now, by 2007, they started changing the packaging from regular size to family size to individual serving packages to 100-calorie serving packages to assorted 6-packs to variety packs to mini chocolate sandwich cookies to breakfast cereal to multi-pack mini cookies, on and on, double stuffed, triple stuffed, mega stuffed, chocolate dipped. I'm yawning, right? Who cares? Then they started doing something pretty interesting. They recognized as they tried to push sales, they tried to push the sale of Oreo cookies internationally, that they couldn't sell just black and white Oreo cookies around the world. People wanted different flavors. A really bright bulb inside of Oreo, inside of Nabisco, now Mondelez, said, wait a minute, there's people in the home market who are trying to buy the Oreos that we created to sell in Sweden or China. And they were actually paying premium prices to get some of these funky flavors. And what came out of that is that Oreo started creating a deluge of new flavors. And I'm going to give you just a partial list of the flavors that are for sale last month on Amazon.com. Right? Now, I know that you might not find all these in the grocery store, but this is what was for sale in Amazon. Mint flavor, lemon flavor, birthday cake flavor, strawberry, red velvet, fireworks, peanut butter, chocolate, half peanut butter, half chocolate, chocolate and strawberry, Swedish fish. Cookies and cream, Mississippi mud jelly donut peeps, candy corn, white chocolate, cinnamon bun, waffles and syrup, key lime, reduced fat, spring flavor. I guess that tastes like grass. Heads and tails Oreos, snow cone, cannoli, coffee cake, dim sum, tiramisu, espresso, pistachio, peach, Rocky Road, carrot cake, fruity pebbles, cherry cola, kettle corn, and pina colada. Now, what they did with that is they then went to the next stage. What they did is they built a machine that 3D printed custom Oreo cookies. And the reason they did that is they put that at strategic locations and fairs, and they wanted to see which sold the most. And then that became the compass for them to decide which of the different flavor varieties they put in the different regions. So it's I thought, just a masterful example. The 3D printing, it's literally a vending machine. You can see the guy holding up the cookie. This is at South by Southwest 18 months ago, trade fair. So they use this to guide where the demand is by flavor. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is the first time I delivered this presentation, there were about 40 executives in the room, and everybody kind of got a kick out of the presentation because there's a lot more here. I'm just giving you the high notes today. They said, you know, Joe, the guy came up to me at the end of the session, and he looked at me, and he was really somber. And he goes, man, that presentation really, really moved me. He said, my company, we got to do better. If people can do this with Oreo cookies, we can do better at my company. And I hope when I share this example with you about Oreo cookies, that somebody could take something so unhealthy, so mundane, so not fresh, and by applying energy and innovation and focus, they can turn it into doubling the sale of that product in less than 10 years. I'm going to shift now. I said I was going to share with you some examples of IT best practices. This is an example of where the budget's coming from. This is worldwide data, and you start at the far right. 20% of the budget, 20% of the money spent on information technology is directly from the IT budget, where IT controls it. 19% of the technology spend inside typical companies is coming from joint projects with the business, but the money is actually in the IT budget. It starts getting more funky in the next category. 21% of the total technology spend, 21% of the total technology spend is coming from projects where the business includes IT, but the money is in the business's budget. And finally, 24% of the technology spend, basically $1 in $4, is coming out of the business's budget, not IT's budget, and IT basically isn't even involved. The other question, you ever hear everybody talk about shadow IT? That's across the bottom. Round numbers, it's about 15% of the spend. It's not 2x, it's about 15% of the spend. And by the way, in the modern era, I don't really think I wouldn't call it shadow spending. I would call it sanctioned experiments, because many of the CIOs know what's going on, and they've just decided it's easier to go off and let the business unit, play in the sandbox by themselves than to muck around, right? It's sort of like, let the 3-year-old touch the stove once, and hopefully they won't get burned too bad. Maybe that was condescending. If it was, forgive me. Just a couple final thoughts. This is a crowd pleaser. Where are we in terms of implementing the technology? Recent survey data, 1,500 organizations worldwide. Basically, 20% have already implemented some form of AI technology. About 18% have some sort of robotics. By the way, blockchain, anybody keeping track of blockchain? Why was May 14th important? May 14th was important because that was the first commercial transaction done by HSBC Bank. They trade financed a shipment of soybeans to the Netherlands from South America. First official commercial transaction, $16 million, May 14th. I think the number on drones, I think we got it wrong, because every real estate picture I look at, every real estate ad has a picture of the drone flyover. Power line inspection, I think when we redo this survey is actually in the field right now for next year. I'm interested to see what the data is. I think you're going to see a lot more. And then finally, AR, VR. This is the final slide today. We're going to go to questions. Our view at IDC is that when we talk about digital transformation, we're looking at a 5-year journey, ladies and gentlemen. Where we are today in 2018 is that 59% of organizations worldwide have these scattered and disconnected strategies for digital transformation. We think that's going to change. We think that in just a couple of years, 50% of the total technology spending will be on data-related investments. Just like that Steinway program to monetize new data feeds, we think a lot of you are going to be doing a lot of things with data monetization, buying and selling. 5 years out, we think that 80% of the revenue growth in terms of all the money spent on IT is going to be related to digital offerings. 80%. That's really when we get to that kind of critical point in the marketplace. And finally, if you go 10 years out, 75% of the organizations will have completed their digital transformation journey. Of course, the obvious question is, what about the other 25%? If 75% have done it? And if you remember that slide early in the deck where I talked about the fallout from the companies that were on the S&P 500, and I gave you the example from the EDI project where the companies chose not to invest in EDI and they were basically bought out, that's what we think is going to happen. This is the end of the prepared remarks. Rachel, I'd like to invite you back up. I know you've got a ton of questions that you'd like to pose, so if you'd like to moderate that.
Come on up, Rachel. Come sit with me. Come sit with
Sure.
me. All right, I have a lot of great questions from the floor. Now, as we go, feel free to continue adding the questions through the Mobi site, and then I'll have this little tablet here that I'll keep refreshing, and if we have time, I'll continue to ask. I have bunches of questions, but I'm going to go straight into the floor questions because I know there are some really good ones. There's one about customer journey, so I'm glad you brought that up with experience. How are we innovating to actually shift the change in experience, which I think is really the crux of what we're trying to do. Should we treat customer journeys as something we should be doing as separate projects, or should it be inbuilt into every project that people undertake?
The answer is yes to both, right? You've got to start somewhere, right? The journey needs to begin with doing it once, and the doing it once has to be, the first 2 or 3 projects, there has to be a proof point and a demonstration that the approach actually adds value, right? So you start out with a couple of examples and you see how it works. My guess is you're going to find that it adds so much value, you're going to say, wait a minute, we need to draw this process into other parts of our organization. So it's like anything else. We have a great idea, we bring it in-house, we need to earn the respect, and we need to demonstrate that it works to our colleagues.
I think the why. Why are we doing what we're doing, and how is this actually shifting the dial? But I also want to talk about internal users, because they're in part customers too.
Absolutely.
If we can't please the internal workflows or the people working in the workflow, then you potentially lose your staff, your talent, get disengaged. How important do you feel is the internal journey?
Honestly, I think it's at least half. There's different companies have different philosophies about who's most important. Is it the customer or is it the employee? If Richard Branson were on the next couch, Richard Branson would be jumping up and down saying that the employee is more important than the customer. If I delight my employees and my employees are engaged, they're going to take care of my customers, and that's going to take care of the bottom line. Other organizations would say the customers are first, so I don't think it's a yes or no to either one. I think that we have to do both.
Yeah, and I think it's a good exercise. I mean, as you've already said, if people within departments and also within their IT department are actually thinking about the journey at the very outright of a project, then they're going to have more clarity in the purpose and hopefully more efficiency as they follow it.
And by the way, when we talk about the internal journey, what we're really doing is setting a performance bar for IT, saying that we have accountability to our colleagues.
Yes. Yep, so true. And this is getting back to KPIs, because this is inherently something that you could have KPIs internally about for each individual, about how they undergo workflows and things like that. Should there be a KPI in empowering customers and their digital adoption?
That's a great question. I haven't heard it posed that way before, but I think depending on the business, I think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, in the end, by having our customers help us stay focused on what the outcomes need to be, we will do a better job. So yes, I think that would be that's something I would consider.
It would be interesting even from a perspective of a website, for example, where there's accountability. Not only accountability as a company with data security and what are they collecting, but also as a customer. How are they stepping up to greater ownership of their data? How are they stepping up to make wiser decisions for themselves, their family? It's an interesting concept, though, to actually bring it both sides of the coin and not just be about companies, it's about consumers as well.
What's interesting is how many of our organizations in this room have websites. Answer all of us. It's very few organizations do a really thorough, systematic job of analyzing what gets put into the question mark box. And the
true.
question mark box by definition represents a failure of the website, right? Because the customer cannot find what they're looking for, or somebody who's interacting with the website. And yet it is the exception rather than the rule that you see that be one of the pillars in terms of website design and performance monitoring.
Yeah, that's true. And getting to the data conversation. So I love how you refuted my remark. Rachel, you looked at me and you said, it's looking way better than you say it is. And I love that. But what I wanted to better understand is data bias. So we polled people in this room, which I'd like to think are more progressive, spirited leaders that want to see significant shifts, but that's already a bias. You're already polling people who are biased towards adopting versus the,
I agree.
So what are your thoughts on how we do a better job of more comprehensive data collecting and overcoming bias due to the sample set?
I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, today's the day I'm going to go to work and blow everything up just for the heck of it. The way it usually works is people wake up and they go, my God, I didn't sleep all night. I tossed and turned and worried because we've got this problem and that problem, and they're scratching at the windows and they're coming through the chimney. Mm-hmm. People react to change and innovate because they have to. That's the nature of the human beast. And when we think about digital transformation, it makes sense that the larger organizations are more engaged because they have business interests offshore, right? And that's being projected inside. What's going to happen is as these organizations, the larger organizations, pull from the smaller suppliers in country, they're going to be then causing those folks to wake up in the middle of the night saying, oh my, I now have to change my way of doing business because this larger company I'm a part of their supply chain or their competitive ecosystem is asking me to up my game. So I think it's actually, given the geography and the economy, I think that it's a rational way that the market seems to be embracing it.
Yeah, sure. And then with these smaller companies where they may not have the talent to even start addressing some of the needs of the corporates, and therefore the corporates go offshore because there is no talent. It's almost like this cyclical chicken or the egg scenario. Yeah. How do we address the skills shortage in some of these areas that you've discussed in New Zealand?
Let me go outside New Zealand. I'll give you a quick example of what happened in the last 6 months at Boeing with one of its principal suppliers, a company called Aerosystems, who manufactures some of the critical components for Boeing. Aerosystems got behind in delivering product to support the Boeing supply chain. Boeing literally sent plane loads of engineers to Aerosystems to help them elevate their game. So I think that for the folks in this room, as they decide what their digital strategies need to be, they need to have their supply chains along with them. And I'm not sure that all of them are recognizing that they have an opportunity to help their supply chain partners accelerate and implement some of the technologies. And yeah, they're not giving them anything because they're going to get the benefit of a lot of that. So there's an opportunity to synergistically partner with folks in their supply chain, which I think achieves the objective that you just pointed out.
Absolutely. Speaking of supply chain and potentially vendors or suppliers, what do we do when cloud service providers have to play nicely in the sandpit to join all the data? Like, I know a lot of companies and legacy systems that don't integrate well. They weren't built necessarily to integrate.
They were built not to integrate.
I know. Case in point, in the health and the legal system, there are management systems that just don't want to plug in. How do we address legacy systems and trying to get all this data plugged in when they may have long-term contracts, or there might just be a huge push to try to get to that point, but not getting the support from the board of directors or the directors? The
interesting thing is you're seeing a whole wave of startups now that literally are doing multi-cloud integration. And the real point of the dialogue, I think, is recognizing the risk of cloud sprawl and having that be part of the plan. Say, how can I consciously avoid it? It's going to happen. How do I at least keep the garden weeded? Yes. How do I try to control it? I think that's really the way to approach it, rather than a black and white, I'm going to allow it to happen or I'm not going to. It's something we're going to fight with from now on.
Yeah. Do you think part of the company loss, I know it's the S&P 500, but do you think it's not only a competitive landscape challenge, but also a relevancy challenge? They're just not relevant anymore, therefore they're no longer surviving.
It's a provocative point of view.
Maybe over a cider. All right, so I'm just going to ask some more of these questions. So Hayden asked if in ANZ and presumably the US are so far ahead on the DX journey, is a new source of, what is it? Is this a new source of competitive advantage? And if so, should we be targeting the digitally backwards markets? Okay, now I understand the question.
Yes and yes.
Yes. Hayden, where are you?
Yes and yes.
Yes.
It is a source of competitive advantage. A quick comment. So I gave you the example of Walmart with their inventory model. And you'd say, well, why is that relevant? In the old days, the view was that I could only scale a store chain to 500 locations. Now the rule of thumb is I can scale a store chain to about 2,000 locations. And I think that it's going to be relatively soon where we can talk about scaling store chains to 5,000 locations. It absolutely is a source of competitive advantage.
It's such an interesting area, and I'm sure from your perspective at IC and with what's going on with the data insights and things, we're really pleased to have you summarising some of this, especially how we compare on the worldwide market. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.